Hello, I'm Dina Chadowitz. I'm on the board of the Jewish Federation of New Hampshire. We are making a educational video to use in connection with International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I'm here today with New Hampshire State Senator Jay Kahn, who has been representing District 10 in New Hampshire for 3 terms and is on a number of committees, including the Senate's Education Committee, the Judiciary Committee. He's also the Senate's appointee to the Education Committee of the states and serves on the New England Board of Higher Education Legislative Committee. Thank you so much, Senator Kahn, for helping us with this video. You sponsored the act relative to Holocaust and genocide education in New Hampshire, which was signed into law in July of 2020. Would you be willing to tell us something of your family's experiences that contributed to your interest in this topic?
Thanks, Dina. Both of my parents are German Jewish. They were born in Germany and both emigrated from Germany because of German persecution prior to World War II, and then as the Nazi Party gained power and began the Second War. Both my parents viewed themselves as German Jews, and the German part of them, it was a part of their ancestry. In fact, both my mom and my dad's fathers fought in World War I for the German army. Both were military, they were injured and recovered and went back to the front. So they were patriotic, and they had established a certain position, both individually and then with their families in Germany. That was a very hard thing to see, the persecution and neighbors begin to turn against their neighbors and against them for their livelihoods that they envisioned, the schools that they may have attended, to exclude them and isolate them more and more from what the country's direction was. And it was very clear that the actions that the Nazis took against Jews were heading down a perilous track and was designed to create fear and cause people to leave with the persecution and fear that was being fomented by the Nazi Party upon their own citizens. So my dad was here in 1936. My mom came in 1940 as a 13-year-old. She entered the United States in 3rd grade at 13 years old because she lacked the language skills. She eventually graduated with her class and went on to high school. My dad was 20 years old when he came to the United States in 1936. He enlisted in the US military and was discharged. He enlisted in 1939. He was discharged in 1941 because his parents in May of 41 emigrated from Germany to the United States. And while that seems like a really late date, and it was, they were fortunate enough to have sponsorship and the immigrant organizations that played a role both for my mom and my dad in helping them get to this country were clearly life-saving, because most of their family, close family, perished during the Holocaust. My mom, coming from a fairly large family that began along the Mosel River in the town of Zell, and people know Zell because of the Schwarzekotz wine, and it is wine country. She emigrated from Cologne, Germany. My dad grew up in a small town, much like Keene, New Hampshire, in fact, a county seat, and not too far from Frankfurt, and had established some real prominence in the town as the department store, which they began. And as a post-World War I business that just kind of took off as manufacturing across the world took off in the 20th century. So, leaving the roots that they had established was a hard thing for both families. And then assimilation in the United States was made difficult because of the feelings in the United States towards Germany and Germans that took, and in fact, that it's something that I experienced as a first generation American, not because anyone could tell that I was Jewish or took off for Jewish holidays or held that against me, but when they'd hear my parents speak, they could pick up, particularly my dad, an accent, and they would wonder, while I was wondering, what did happen to the relatives that we lost that they talk about so often, and try to piece together that story in the 1950s. It was in the schoolyard where kids would come up to me and say, what army did your dad fight for in World War II? And were they Nazis? And, did their parents have to fight my ancestors, my dad and his family? And of course not. But they held that kind of bias towards Germans, German Jews, that perhaps they were German Americans were somehow responsible for the stories that Americans told of their war consequences. So that's my connection to the Holocaust, and I think what we recognize in our country is most immigrant groups came to this country because of some persecution that they or their ancestors experienced in their former homeland. And it's understanding that so that our society, founded on democratic principles of equality and justice, that we recognize those early seeds that our ancestors experienced, so that we make sure this society doesn't do things to isolate populations. And then we recognize it across the globe that these atrocities that occurred over time are things that we learn from, and that we don't let them get to the point where we say, if we would have known, we would have done something. But we did know, and we do know, and we need to do something.
Well, let me ask you, given that the American ideal is democratic and accepting of the ideal, accepting of people from other countries, what were your reasons for sponsoring this bill for feeling that the bill was necessary.
I think we lose sight of how fragile democracies are. There's a poignant point in my growing up years, those teen years when you kind of speak up against things that your folks may try to convey to you. And one of the things, in the Germanness of the household, I would express to my mom was, "Oh, that can never happen here." And what was becoming more obvious in uh, this 21st century is that maybe the seeds are being sowed here, and maybe it could happen here. And I couldn't believe that in my lifetime I would come from that idealistic perception that perhaps our country, America, was somehow different from other countries around the globe, and then 60 years later come to accept that no, that could happen here. And if we aren't diligent in telling the stories and helping people observe what other people experience, then we are complicit in the undermining of the American experience, and we can't be. And I don't think that's the way people perceive our country. But some people experience things differently than the majority, and we need to understand how minorities view our society, and be sensitive to how we're more inclusive in our society. So I think that the bill, while it expresses the Holocaust as a dramatic turning point in genocides that have occurred over time, it doesn't exclude and it's not exclusive in its purpose. The documentation that there is of the German Holocaust, the German perpetrated Holocaust, is really astounding. And it's one that we can learn a great deal from, but it's certainly not exclusive to the genocides that have occurred over time. And even in the 20th and 21st centuries, we can observe genocide occurring today around the globe. And we can apply what was well-documented situations to our current situations and say, are we at tipping points across the globe? And challenge our students, challenge ourselves to recognize when we need to help call out atrocities, and do so at an early enough point that they don't become heinous crimes against humanity.
Senator Kahn, what are some of the lessons you would like students to learn from the Holocaust and from other genocides?
We need to recognize that throughout history, minority groups and minorities have experienced what only they can describe. The kind of bias and persecution that comes of being viewed as different, whether that difference is one of religion, physical abilities and handicaps, whether it's the color of your skin, or the language that you speak, that we're not always as human beings, accepting of those who are different from our idea of what is the majority look or feel or tendencies, and that every time we fail to be inclusive of that person's difference, that that person is more isolated. And the more isolated they become, the easier it is for them to be uh, objects and not equal in standing as part of the society. And the more that evolves, we begin to take on attitudes, behaviors towards others that that just compound that sense of isolation. And as that occurs, we become more accepting of the kind of actions that hurt, that either create verbal or physical or economic abuse and isolation and injustice. And that's something that we can all play a role in trying to, instead of building those barriers that cause people to be traumatized by their experience and their interactions with other people, that we take down those barriers and that we become more open to understanding a person's position of isolation, and that we try to create more inclusive ways of understanding and restoration, and become a more trauma-informed society, so that trauma isn't something that gets passed down from one generation to the next, but is something that we can actually break the chains of trauma and isolation and inequality and injustice. That's what I think we hope becomes of this education and this topic, because this isn't intended to be easy. This isn't just let's read the history. This is let's talk about each other's experiences and understand how we can be actors and not just observers of somebody else's pain and isolation and inability to participate as fully in our society as they possibly could.
Thank you. Any other words of wisdom for our students watching this video?
Be inquisitive, challenge yourself around these questions of what does it mean to be human, and to recognize the humanity in all of us, and work to try to create the kind of opportunity and fairness that we would like for ourselves. Try to establish that for others. Recognize we all play a role, and I think we've got a long way to go. I think we have built up some blinders to just what other people are experiencing, whether it's in our society or beyond. And got to break down some of those defense mechanisms and accept that it's not the same for all. And and a goal is to understand that and try to be actors in building the kind of restorative, fair, equitable, just society for all humans.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Kahn, for talking with us and participating in this video and for sponsoring the Holocaust and Genocide Education Act, which is now law in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Dina.